Peace, salam, shalom. Uh, I've got not very much battery, but I want to establish. Well, what's the big plan then? So, say that there's such thing as an Islamic State now. Uh, UK, the Commonwealth, all of Sham under, except for State of Israel, because I haven't acknowledged it, and it'd be rude to not mention that. So, Israel, I'm sorry you're surrounded, but that was the case before. And that wasn't my doing. That was the. Don't worry, don't worry. That's all going to be the past. Everyone's where they are. All the things are there. Good. Islam is an alternative posed to you right now to the police state. That's the Islamic State as opposed to perhaps the Islamic religion. So you don't need to follow the Islamic religion to be a full member of an Islamic State and to be provided with provisions, securities, benefits of being a member of the Islamic State. The Islamic State, which inshallah will be set up under my name, is you can be anywhere in the world and have any kind of citizenship, and also, if you want, have Islamic State citizenship. You'll be able to contribute to, if you like polynormativity, if you like polynormativity, if you like the idea that different groups can live side by side, preserving mutual and each other's interests, and that can extend to the whole world and all the groups. That's what I'm proposing under the very same standard as you have seen, Islamic State. Well, I couldn't have the idea. Muhammad had the idea, and he founded it. Peace and blessings be upon him. Peace and blessings be upon our Ummah. Now, really, the contention is like, oh, okay, well, that sounds very good, but who are these Muslims? I'm saying you can join the Islamic State without being a Muslim, but obviously you want to know what who would you be agreeing to with before we would even get into what are the specifics. The specifics so far, as we've done in the last video, not unrelatedly, I'm going to smoke my first bit of spliff for the morning because I have a lot of PTSD and it helps like nothing else. I can feel myself wobbling about. So that's going to make me feel good. Inshallah. Alhamdulillah, it's very good medicine for me. We'll speak about some high points. I'm just going to speak about what I love about Islamic law. It's also good whilst we're doing this that I'll take some time that I'm not performing for you. Like, whoever is watching this, for everything I do, it's fairly important. You need to understand that everything I do is not particularly for you, no matter who you are. If you see me like explaining something, I'm only explaining to a category that don't get it, and I'm not supposed to be particularly about the people who don't get it. All the text is here. I go a lot quicker if I can just go straight towards my intention is, which isn't something that's a reflection of what anyone else is doing or that I might imagine that they might think about the world. We're just dealing with text here. Text is magic. Text is really good. People who like Harry Potter, but not transphobia, like, hi, Islamic State. I mean, the four houses thing is pretty snazzy. I like it. We could do that. It's kind of what the Constitution of Medina poses. It's beautiful that people would have their own specialities, because we're at this point now where if it were left to democracy, we would all end up one same kind, indistinct. Oh, it'd be horrible. We'd start all of civilization again and have to do all this work of all this war, joining up people together again, and it's not going to happen until that. Well, right. East and West, I think the first thing that you should know about Islamic law in 2020 is that most of us have most everything wrong. That is our condition. It's the human condition. Alhamdulillah, we don't know. We're not put on this earth as knowers. We're put on this earth as finder-outers. If we want to do stuff, we don't even need to find out stuff if we just want to be comfortable in whatever we're comfortable with. Great. Literacy and knowledge kind of makes possible what we want and makes it possible to design things that we want that escalate and escalate so we can have more and more. Today our world is so rich that the legal systems who are here, say in the UK for instance, like they weren't set up to be good, and we can see that, and they weren't set up to be kind to the common man. They weren't even letting the common man vote. Amazingly, we've tested it. When the common man was given vote in the UK, politics didn't profoundly change. You had like a First World War and you had a Second World War. The universal vote had in the middle. And you had conscription in both cases where working men were treated woefully. Carted off to war to shoot at each other. It's bad. Islamic law, it's beautiful because it doesn't change. So you don't need leaders then. With respect to an Islamic state, you can have leaders for your Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. But Allah is Dumbledore. And he's made the text very clear. It doesn't change. And so our relationship with Dumbledore can be, I guess I'm going to be Dumbledore. I can't personify God. My interest is purely keep the houses together whilst I do my magic stuff in the background, and it's not really to do with anything. Allah is so much greater than Dumbledore. I'm really sorry that I did that. If you want, you can imagine Allah is like Dumbledore in capacities of being like the executive who is kind. And maybe, does he have like a bit of all the houses in him? Because Allah made all the houses. Even though they're distinct, he loves them equally because they're all expressions of his ultimate will and really important pieces in it. The houses, of course they would be. So one good thing about Islamic law is that it doesn't change. It means you don't need anyone to be in control of you. Fundamentally, all the way back to Abraham, peace and blessings be upon him, all the way back to Adam, peace and blessings be upon him, we're skeptical of rulers. I think that's a human condition. We're skeptical of rulers. For me, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're all Abrahamic religions. So the thing they most have in common that we all point back to Abraham and go, something about him was good, even if it's just the fact that a lot of people agree with him, like 5 billion or so. There's more good qualities to Abraham, peace and blessings be upon him, than the 5 billion of 7 billion people say we're his family, we're descent from him, we follow his way. In a word, or in a, he doesn't believe that a man can be superior to him. Like, I don't believe a man can be superior to me. And not only that, like Abraham, I'm happy to wander around, live on the street, go to soup kitchens, write, make music, make instruments, make inventions. I love all that. Make math. I love all that. Abraham, he loved what he was doing. He wandered around. He had excellent adventures. But it wasn't enough for him. He needed other people not to be subjugated under others. That's a kind of invasion or colonializing ethic that Abraham has. Peace and blessings be upon him. He's not just happy to live the way he wants. He has something that he insists upon about how other people live. That you're not going to be up above and underneath each other, but instead that everyone would be beneath one same thing. as equals. That's the basis of Islamic law too. This word Muslims has one meaning in the Quran. One. Lots of words in the Quran maybe used in different senses, but Muslim has one context. No other context for this word Muslim, apart from Abraham, peace and blessings be upon him, says, "Here is my family, the Muslims." So, kind of complicated, but as Muslims, we believe that this term, Muslims, means the family of Abraham, peace and blessings be upon them. So it's not about, do you wash behind your ears? Do you get baptized? Do you get circumcised? We have it also from the Quran that there's a distinction between, some of the descendants of Abraham are really going to like what God has in store, and some of them aren't. The good ones are going to like what God has in store. Everyone who comes from Abraham tradition, it is the same as saying we don't acknowledge earthly rulers. Abraham most surely didn't. Peace and blessings be upon him. And that's what we think is a cool example. He's not our king, just somebody who founded the Abrahamic religions, in as much as he did that. I get all gushed up and excited about Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, because that's the best documented person in history. There's loads you can know about Muhammad, and no matter who you are, you can have a sort of healthy parasocial relationship with Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in a way that you can't with Christ, even though we know Christ had more superpowers. There's a very small number of prohibitions in the Quran. Don't eat pork unless you're on a journey or you're not intending sin in it. Don't have sex in the masjid whilst it's Ramadan and it's the evening and you're you're staying there for itikaf with the intention of ritual purity. When you're staying in the masjid and it's Ramadan, don't have sex there. That prohibition derives entirely from the Quran, and right, it's not going to come up very often. In fact, I've seen that has happened. Very, very, I saw that happen. Yeah. I mean, I saw two people coming to, oh gosh, the situation of this masjid. Okay. If you like drugs, none of the drugs are illegal in Islam. If you like prostitution, Allah has massive respect and support for sex workers and has reattested this over and over again, whilst also saying that you can't force people into it. If you like trans people, we're always part of this story. Without police, law means an entirely different thing. It means what you can agree on. Therefore, it's not about the contentious details. If they ever come up and there's a problem, we need every community to be able to sort themselves out. That's Sharia. There's another prohibition. In the case that it's doing your head in, being around disbelievers, don't be near disbelievers. It's way more peaceful than what I was saying yesterday. But murder, for instance, isn't prohibited. It's dealt with by the Quran, and so we have ways to deal with murder when it comes up. And we have a way of deriving a piece of Islamic law when we need it, but it doesn't say don't go kill. You've already heard that bit if you heard the Ten Commandments. Is the Ten Commandments binding on anyone? Was it ever meant to be? Doesn't matter. We've got our sources and what we really, really need, every community, everywhere. Not just geographically, but also with respect to, let's call them houses. That every community has a way of sorting out problems amongst itself. And also that there's a way of sorting out intra-community disputes. Could you imagine they're always going to come up, unless we're slavishly abating some small set of possibilities. We're going to try new things, and occasionally, whilst we're doing that, someone nearby us is going to have a problem. I think that's good. Like, I can get a kind of virus in my body that makes my body attack my body to kill the virus, and then the virus is gone. And my body has attacked my body, but for the health of my body. To make this work, it's a principle of Islamic law that it's meant to be as simple as possible, and the structures all involved are as simple as possible. That you've got a community, your community is within the Islamic State guaranteed help and equality, and should it need to be said, non-judgment. I can't judge you whilst I'm considering you my equal. What you want to do, it can be very foreign to me, but it's okay. And when I say don't eat pork is in the Quran, it doesn't mean that there can be no pork eating within the jurisdiction of an Islamic State in space. No, if you want to do that, Islamic law provides for your right to do that by saying you definitely have self-governance. But if you were to choose between Islamic law and the law made up by people who are improvising laws constantly, really just trying to save their bacon whilst representing a system of representatives which clearly doesn't work. But still, they keep on adding more and more laws. Like, how many more laws do we need? What's a politician's job? They make up more laws. How many more laws do we need? We've got plenty of laws. We've got laws at home, and they don't work. What's their result? If anyone, even if you're, the most outspoken decrier, zealot of nobody should believe in anything, but I offer to you, do you want a state where you got all of the laws that you know about and the police and all of that system, and you got to pay for it, and you got to live alongside it, and there's all of that, and you don't matter at all. You don't have moral agency in that system. Or, well, we live side by side each other in our different communities. It helps if we're a little bit distinct, like recognizably distinct. But there's no provision that has to be the case. And what do we prohibit? What does an Islamic State prohibit if you want to be a Muslim in the Islamic State? You got to say, La ilaha illallah. That there's no God except for in the case that there is God, that would be God. And then, like, if you kill someone and the community around thinks that it's best to take action against that, then that extends all the way up to a life for a life. But with respect to Islamic law and respect to the Quran, I want to mention exactly how this is put to us by the Quran. So, because I think it's a beautiful example of how our law is conceived by Allah, the Almighty, the Most Wise. From the translation, I love it. This A life for a life has been enjoined upon you. If a person kills another person, then that person owes that person's family something. But it is better for them to forgive. Best case scenario, I kill your brother, you forgive me. Best case scenario, you kill my brother, I forgive you. Best case scenario, lots of Muslims get killed by a flailing system that keeps on invading and not doing any good for its own citizens, and we forgive you. The justice system that I peaceably live alongside and forgive for having persecuted me several times, and so unabatingly. It's very punitive. It's called the justice system, but what is upheld really is the state's right to hurt someone if they do something wrong, in terms of what that state that day has improvised is wrong, to the extent that they're looking at you, or half the murders go unsolved. You don't get anything out of chasing people to punish them. The interest of Sharia is that the community stays stable, even though unpredictable things are going to happen. Instead of a law that a man makes that's written down and says, here's what's going to happen in the case that this happens. Just like the least flexible thing, the least good thing at handling new things that could happen in a community that would need new answers. Instead, these kinds of events that need some kind of resolution, they're always resolved at the community level, traditionally by community leaders, just whoever's trusted locally to be the person who would judge between disputes. How if they start acting corrupt? Good. They're in your hands. You can kill them. Like, you're not deferring. Everyone in my area lives under the rule of Joris Bonson, who's over there, who doesn't really exist. Instead, anyone who feels like, yeah, I don't mind taking upon myself the responsibility to judge between disputes, if you're the person who can make the judgments that nobody else in your community feels is unfair, then excellent. If you need two communities to make that happen, fine. So that each one can have the judge that they feel represents them. But it's not that difficult if you're one person to try and think of what both communities both want, because they're not so different. And they've got texts, and their texts are going to agree on something. And so instead of being predicated on punishment, Sharia is predicated on resolution. Also mercy, minimality of repercussion. If we can fix something by nuking you, or fix something by speaking with you, we're going to speak with you. Purely for the aesthetic of minimality, of repercussions. Nothing in our history resembles revenge or retaliation. We're going to keep that going. It makes it safe for people who might have worried that they had made enemies with Islam by their violence onto Muslims. No, really. God doesn't prevent or forbid killing. It says no sin is on you for seeking from God's bounty with respect to conquest. That it's there. It's one of the options and possibilities that's here in the world. Today, if you want to go and start a violent conquest and take over the world, you're going to be shot down by lots of people on your way to getting there. And so it's never going to be your best move. Cool. It's good that we reached that point in history. So, what I didn't make explicit, but is obvious from what I've said, Sharia is applicable to you if you wanted to live in an Islamic state but not be Muslim. And if you've got a source in your community of anything that you agree on, even if you want to make it up and say, well, you know, here's our basic principles. And it's not like you have to think about every bad thing in advance and then think about what bad things you can do on top of it if they happen, but just anything really to give the judges a clue when they're trying to make up resolutions for your community when something bad happens. It's going to be good if that judge can refer to something and say, look, well, we all agree on this, therefore, how about we go this way? Sharia has survived a really long time whilst, like, being praised like no other legal system. Thanks to God, Sharia that the Muslims propose is the most the Sharia that the Jews propose, which is the Sharia that Christ says, "I am Sharia." Not his crucifixions, not his actions. Christ says, "I am Sharia." Like, if you wanted a woker individual, if you wanted a more peaceable individual, a more wisely go right to the source of the problem individual, well, let's make our consequence, you know, something that's really resonant and that lots of people can look back on and go, okay, so there was a judgment, there was a ruling, there was an enactment, and there's something to take away from the fact that something had been violated. And in this case, the one saying, I am Sharia, he's happier for him to be crucified, which you could interpret, Sharia is happy for Sharia to be banned than for someone else to get hurt. It just means the way. It's very beautiful. You know, law in English means what law means in English, which Sharia is innocent of. A decent translation of Sharia also is law. Like koi carp. Koi means carp. Sharia law. If anyone says Sharia law, you can be pretty confident that they don't really like Sharia enough to read about it. Is there anything within an Islamic state and within like the current norms of Sharia, which aren't going to go anywhere or change, which says that no matter which community you are, if you're interested in polynormativity, autonomous self-governance, or non-geographically distinct groups who have certain protections for them. Well, we heard it in the Constitution of Medina that there were certain things that were binding on the contracted parties who were equals with help, but they were also expected to do some things that, like, just in their weight and worth, were meant to be much smaller than what was being offered. Like, we're going to give you all of this, and want you to do some things too. What are those? Well, that if we're invaded, although we're talking about world peace now, so it changes things, but if we're invaded, then everyone's against the invader. Everyone from here. Also, again, which doesn't apply so much today, if we're going on conquest, don't have loads of different conquests coming out from one. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he's the leader of the conquest, the person setting up the treaty, the person making an agreement with the other groups, not as their religious authority, not as their supreme judge, but as a person who's making treaty, saying, we're going to give you all this, and if you're going on war expeditions, you want to be with Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So yes, there are things that enact, and like therefore in Sharia we have an idea that the Islamic State with the Islamic State, Muslims, Christians, Jews, whoever, Zoroastrians, Harry Potters, Hindus, within a state. It's very easy to imagine the idea is Islamic State means Muslims and then everyone else, but equals with help. It's what we were set up to do. Like Muslims, we are invited and encouraged to practice very hard, and like do more than anyone else is asked to do. Why? So that we have spare left over that we can try and help other communities survive. And actually, that's good for us too. That it would be, the perfect society or the perfect way has to accommodate the fact that other people have different ways. It has to be then about your relationship with other people who have other ways. And Islamism, Mohammedism, Constitution of Medinaism, Islamic statism, Caliphatism is, we are different communities, so let's afford the maximum equality to the other communities. From the first year of our calendar, from the first moment that our state was enacted by mutual agreement. Alhamdulillah. All of this is very, very good to have today access to. Or would there be any? I mean, there doesn't seem to be, nor needs to be, a provision that we would add anything to. Well, it is Muhammad who has set up the Islamic State. There can't be. I can't come in and say, well, I would like this extra responsibility on all of the groups. It's not a thing. You can be the bacon nation within the Islamic State, and Muslims will be like this with you. That's what the original Constitution of Medina did too. There were some of the people in that group, and they were named in the list of all the people we consider equal, who turned out like they were the bacon nation of Jews living in Medina. A minority within a minority within a world of feuding tribalism. And still, all of the protection, it's on us how we treat other communities. And we think that this is the best way that we can propose. Partly because it's lasted so long and it's worked for so long. Our history doesn't tell a different story. Our history tells a different story to the contemporary news published in the English language. Very different story. Like, how old is the English language? You've only had the West for about 250 years. I'm saying, oh no, the Western system is messed up. Like, that hurt me too. But hey, look, there's this thing that works and has lasted a long time. It's just really hard to see that it works and has lasted a long time because they're the main enemy of the people who are most astray, civically. Rape is hugely important. Islamic State is about getting along and not raping. Within your own communities, you can define consent how you want. So do we, and we do it totally differently to anyone else. It means that whatever your sexual practices are, Christians, Jews, Muslims, bacon nation, that's not applicable to your equal and helpness within the Islamic State. Our fact that we want to get along as different communities has nothing to do with how those communities want to run themselves, except in the case that one is going to violate another. Hopefully that won't be necessarily told when we feed everyone. And people mostly want peaceful societies. And if you have a system that works and feeds everyone, everyone is like naturally grateful and naturally wants to preserve the peace as if it were their own body, like it's self-defense. I've got some nice writings that I consider part of this that are about a sensible definition of property, and therefore like what it means to own your own body. Do you ever try to sit down with a pen and just make it sensible to yourself why you expect that you have the right not to be raped? Like, what is that right, and on what account do you say that that shouldn't happen? What does that shouldn'tness mean? It's pretty difficult to reasonably argue that nobody should rape you. Rape is a big problem because the thing that decays theocracies is patriarchy, and the thing that patriarchy does is rapes and invades. So we've got two big principles for this theocracy that can hold other kind of ocracies in it, where the theocracy cannot change. Saying like, well, we really want this system to exist because at least we believe that it's about all the different groups getting along with each other as well as we can, and also not raping. Our only violent imperative today is probably global warming and rape, but we're not going to fight anyone because we've got the fighting done with the pen and also improvised explosive devices and stuff in the past, and also like weapons that people left around in our countries before the other countries invaded. It was also how we did some of the fighting. Alhamdulillah. Thanks for all the fallen shades. It's been a lovely war, really. So I said about rape, and also two contemporary issues, global warming and rape. And I mentioned this term, violent imperative. Violent imperative comes entirely from my own scholarship, which is a thing I can do as a judge of Sharia. I like to read Sharia, I like to think about how it applies to things. It makes me a judge of Sharia in as far as I'm able to judge that. Violent imperative means exactly what it says on the tin. It's one of the ways I was trying to be able to write my way towards, well, there's a people right now who live around the Arctic Circle, and they've got this amazing thing going on that their languages work in a circle. It's so hard to conceive of, like how it's just an entirely distinct shape in the universe, a set of languages that works in a circle. And languages are sort of the shapes that things can be in. They're informatic spaces. Usually a language is the most complicated thing. How do you define a language if you're saying how the universe starts? You've got to get the atoms and then the stars, and then let the stars blow up, get more elements, get the planets, okay, get life on Earth, start growing, all the way to civilizations, and then you've still only got recourse for one language once you figure out like the whole of the human psyche and how it is affected by the rest of the world. To then get an Arctic Circle with a circle of languages that these people, they can understand these people, who can understand these people, who can understand these people, but from here to here, it's going to be harder, so that they can all have different ones, and then of course it comes around in the circle. to plan it in advance would be incredibly difficult, but what has happened there is each one of them, of course, they just talk to their neighbors and have never tried to colonize each other. And so they have this just amazing, unique, precious entity like nothing else, which is also a real, like a document better than the one I just read to say that these people, they're good and they're nice and they live in a nice way. But they're the first ones who are going to melt as we globally warm. That Britain's not going to get worried about global warming until they start flooding, but that's going to happen a long time after the Arctic Circle starts flooding. Well, within the 2 billion Muslims, there are some like me who we like the peace of our religion and we like the war of our religion. I'm not violent, I'm not aggressive, I'm not even mad. But I recognize that whilst there is violence in this world as its day-to-day norm, and a need and so much opportunity, yeah, not a need, opportunity for peace, then I have constructed for myself, for my own purposes of deriving what is okay and not okay, and that I can state to you, I think there is such thing as violent imperative. Some causes that can be imperative can perhaps be violently imperative. How this would work is that I would make a fatwa and say, I think this is violently imperative. Anyone who agrees, they can go do it. Why is that? If I go smash a window on the high street and then move into an abandoned building, I'm invading, I'm colonizing. It's perfectly okay for me to do in the Quran. Squatting, really importantly, is preserved in the Quran as something like holy and protected. It's good, it's natural. If there's building there and someone wants to use it, they're allowed to use it. God says so. And imagine the alternative. Be treacherous. In a way, I see an emboldening of just the opportunity that's there in violent conquest. I can say, I have this opinion. I'm not asking anyone to do anything, nor am I being shy about the fact that I think that there is a great opportunity in violent conquest to end violent conquest, because the state of affairs right now, the norm, is that there's constant violence whilst the Arctic Circle melts. All the 2 billion Muslims, next to Jews, next to Christians, next to the atheists, next to the computer wizard club, whoever, all the 2 billion Muslims agree that the Islamic State design, where all the different communities can live side by side, is good. Muhammad said so. He designed this state where people live side by side, peace and blessings be upon him, with uncomplicated and already read out in full rules about what that means. They all get attacked, they band together, they have a unified plan of war together. If I were to say that something is violently imperative, I would mean for all groups. That if you haven't had religious guidance anymore, that doesn't take away from the fact that it can be right to pick up a weapon and rebel against a violent system that's oppressing you too. Not all the Muslims agree with that. It's not my job to say things that only all the Muslims agree with. It's my job to make very distinct what is from the Quran and applies to everything that exists as far as it can be said. What is from Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, who was doing what I'm attempting to do and was guided by Allah, whom I call upon as my guide. and whose authority isn't the same as the authorities in the Quran. He is an example who derived judgments from the Quran and gave an example of how to derive judgments from the Quran. And he made opinions, fatawat, from the Quran. Exemplary opinions, exemplary derivations. I've expressed one opinion that isn't like uncontentious, uncontended doctrine of the Muslims, which is there is such thing as violent imperative. That's all my own work. I said so. If I am to offer any sort of campaign of war, like as I would give you plans, I would give you justification, I would give you bounds. For instance, we could have a property-only war that if you live in a developed, industrialized, secularized city type of place, if you live most places in the world, you can get a drone for like £20. A remote control flyable drone. You can attach what you want to it. I got a paper on drone warfare that I gave to, I think, socialist programmers read it. Not, hey, Muslims, here's my secret war plans, but hey, look, everyone, there's this big system, and war can give it a budge, or even perhaps the threat of war being talked about and saying, well, one of the ways is this apocalyptic Muslims just have to take over the world type thing by violence, and we really could. We're everywhere. And if you've got a war to achieve something, it's actually pretty easy to win because you can plan. But if it's just to try and make some people submit to you who they're already submitted to Allah, then subhanahu wa ta'ala, be a difficult situation. I do have that opinion. I think that all violence against property right now is a good deed. Key every car, flight drones with little spray paint things on them to clear up the CCTV camera's image. Everything ads. That would be my biggest imperative. All of the ads in public, just deface them, because in fact, you're not being oppressed by the system that oppresses you if you have to pay lots of taxes to things that you don't agree with. You're doing that yourself. But the images around you make it very, very difficult to consider your own moral agency or to direct it. It's invasive, and that's where I believe the war is. The letters that are written in public. And its residue is ignorance, which accumulates. Defacing property seems like a really good thing to do right now. If we could have a property-only war, and it would be guerrilla war, and my instructions to you if you wanted to participate would be, well, don't get caught before you do the thing you want to do, and make the thing that you want to do pretty good to get away with. Drones are good for this. Remote controlled drones, they're amazing for this. You can, leave a drone in a bag somewhere, say in an alleyway, go across the street, go into Starbucks, start playing on your phone, drive the drone into a bank across the road. You could have explosives on it. The drones carry a bit of anything, gas or paint. Drive them where you want to go and detonate them. That is a possibility that all of us have. Could we combine those possibilities with some kind of good ethic to maybe try and give the property owners and the, I don't know, the moneyocracy because it's not the people actually, it's the systems, and the systems, they're manifest as machines which are property. You could only destroy all the banks, then there would be no banking, and the people, they could go away free. As toward this kind of plan, I would suggest that if you were gonna invade public property in the interest of, or actually invade private property in the interest of the public, well, the workers there aren't really negligible, nor grievously complicit, not violently imperatively complicit. So look, I made up this thing, violently imperative. It sounded like I'm just getting an excuse to try and hurt people, but our first application for it is that, yeah, okay, so some people are complicit. Lots of people are complicit. If you're watching this, you're absolutely complicit in killing loads of Muslims, and you knew that. But not violently imperatively complicit. Yes, we can get friends. We can be friends. I know you don't want the people invading me, and you don't want the people invading my family. Whether you know it or not. But, this isn't about threats. If we were going to do this kind of thing, I would add to my opinion that it's good to give a warning to any place. Say you wanted to even just cause a nuisance attack in a bank, like you wanted to have a paint grenade that goes off in a bank. Sure, do it. It's one of the things you can do. I'm not endorsing it. I'm saying I think there might be an opinion to be made that there's a war on property that is justifiable. I would say you want to, just because you can, say to that branch of the bank, don't be there next week. If you could muster just the critical amount of fear to make that work, and I mean terror, because it's been taught to me, like by you, your fucking propaganda, and not a jot in our scriptures about propaganda or or terrorism. No, that's nothing to do with Islam. But hey, guys, you've given me a great idea as an independent scholar, loving all the scriptures. Let's talk about terrorism. How does Al-Qaeda work? The person who's got the best idea for Al-Qaeda magically becomes the person who other people agree with if they publish it in the right places, and then people go, oh yeah, so that's the new thing that someone has said, and maybe I agree with it or not. People independently following their own judgment, who, like in the sort of Western terrorist attacks, which is something completely different to the defensive invasion, and also something, well, pressing either, whether it would be, hey, we need to cut it out, make sure it never ever happens again, that anyone dies in the West on account of warring on Muslims. Or in this other context, maybe we can use that, like, technology, which I say has been defined in myth, of terrorism. You have not seen one campaign. For instance, and here is the point that I'm building up to. Say you wanted to end the HSBC bank. There's a bank here called HSBC. Imagine you wanted to end the HSBC bank and just say, you know what, you invest in weapons. You've invested loads of people's money in weapons without really telling them. And you're one of the core pieces of war machinery, as war is this mechanized algorithm which keeps on going on, keep on doing war from the same place, on the same place, whilst these get more and more aggressive, and they're not happy. A lot of people have a lot of things to gain from getting rid of the banking system and replacing it from something else. A lot of people with a whole lot of money and all of the resources that money can buy you have a lot of interest in keeping the banks as they are. Seems like a majority would win out of, for instance, I have this design of super banks, but don't worry about it. A better system of banking. It kind of holds companies instead of bank accounts. And if you're a foundling company, like you get the too big to failness from everyone, just because, you know, we don't want you to fail. We've got enough money to keep you going until you start returning a profit, which then goes to everyone. Important principle of Sharia for the Muslims, Jews, and Christians bit, we really don't have usury. You can't charge interest for lending money. And like, again, that's just good for everyone. If you have that kind of system, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It exponentiates. And at a time it gets really steep, which is good because everyone notices it then and goes, oh, that's not good. So we could say we wanted to get rid of one particular high street bank, to do it one at a time, maybe. Yeah, it seems more reasonable than just an outright attack on banking. Oh. As a purely military decision that you don't run into a crowd if you can pick off flies on the edge. What you've never seen in the West, which I wouldn't and haven't mentioned like casually, other than that there's a big imperative, and now I'm mentioning it in this specific context with respect to what does a non-violent war look like if we use property to try and kill property so that property isn't killing Muslims. Oh, drones. You could say to a bank, don't be there on Monday. They fly in, make your phosphorus paint bomb blow up. Horrible. You wouldn't be able to do business for the rest of the day, and then you'd need to clean it all up. And then at some point, say, don't be in that branch next Monday. And then do it again. How do you feel the next Monday? And in terror, there is a mercy. Not that you've seen it. You have not seen one campaign. How would you feel if, you've seen that people can blow up. You've seen that actually we're okay with blowing up. We like it, some of us. You've seen that Allah the Most High has given us instructions so far as we believe, and no one has a right to say that they're false, not without checking them. Everyone who checks them tends to fall in love with them. Kurt Gödel says our religion is consistent. He didn't go around saying that loads of religions are consistent. Just happened that mentioned that once. We've got good reason to believe, in fact, that Allah doesn't mind us warring under very ethical terms for purposes of Allah, which don't need to be defined. You're not allowed unless Allah makes it happen. By making up categories for sequential attacks, you could cause a lot of disruption and a lot of then impetus for stopping a perpetuation. You apply a lot of impetus to not perpetuating the current violent norm with minimal damage, minimal effort, minimal cost, minimal risk of human harm. If we're saying that there can't be human harm, which is definitely where I am for right now. I don't think there needs to be. I think that we get a victory from being way better, morally better than the people who are attacking us, and it seems to be going well so far. We can use the truth to our advantage. If it were the case that in one city, like, I don't know, in one high street, there's 5 different banks. This week, I run up with an IED. I blow myself up in one bank. Next week, I blow up in another bank. Next week, I blow up in another bank. Both the 2 remaining banks no one's going to be there the next week. They've just seen someone blow themselves up 3 times in front of them who I don't even have to say anything, that those other 2 banks, you worry about going to them. I say this to point out that that's never happened. That would be terrorism. If you're trying to use fear to create some kind of impetus. Because as it is right now, if there has been a terrorist attack in the West, it has only been that country was already invading Muslims. B, the safest place you can be is where it just got attacked. Because there hasn't been any campaigns. You've seen that there's lots of people who, the moment it's needed, like we've established a call and response thing. France don't come out the moral victors in it's the French governance, but it does become more and more inextricable with the people the more and more the fascist system is able to effectively indoctrinate its people, if only on that specific point. The French secular regime doesn't need to teach you everything about everything, but as long as it can dominate how you believe about Muslims, well, things can get indefinitely terrible. Projecting images of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, on public buildings, that's reckless, that's dangerous, that's aggressive. That's more aggressive to us than the 16 Muslim countries that France is invading with drone strikes where they don't keep track of how many civilians they killed. And they've disbanded from the rest of the UN program. And they had colonized before with a distinct French approach to colonization where they tried to remove all the cultures from there and ban all the native languages and things and make sure that everyone spoke French. They also didn't do that, except that it was also in Muslim lands too, which now they're still trying to invade because we're still Muslims and undefeated. All of that doesn't really have anything to do with projecting images of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, onto government buildings whilst you're France. My position on this, and I hope this can be representative of whatever. You're allowed to do that. We're allowed to establish that each time you do that, we'll kill you. It's good. We can do it till the end of time. No one's forcing you to project images of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, onto public buildings. No one's forcing us to kill you in return. You think that's a good thing to do? We think this is a good thing to do. Who's more morally justified? Alhamdulillah. I don't propose violence at all unless it would be outright and global, and I'm nowhere near to needing that to be my plan. Geez, under my design, everyone's gonna get free food, get free living spaces, be allowed to wander where they want. We're gonna have spaces that they're only for, atheist-only spaces if you want to. Certainly in a place like London, we've got so much intermingliness, and it's the best thing about London. But I also want New Dalston, a place where white people aren't necessarily allowed to be. Why? Because you live in London, you got to always be a minority somewhere. And in fact, you're not. There's already places where there's Muslim majority places in London already, and that's That's a function that is really easy for Muslims to get along because we agree on the same stuff. But it would be cool to have, like there is Chinatown. I don't know what to say. Afrobeat town, Fela Kuti town. Everyone, you have to get into that. Well, category politics. I don't acknowledge different races. You're humans. We come in many species, like specifiable things, but that's a function of specification. It could have sounded really weird to say the place where all the. Anyway, gay town. Why do you need straight people around you? Have gay towns. We did it. I've never thought of that before. And places where everyone's allowed to be side by side, of course. But autonomous spaces where feed everyone first, give houses to everyone also first. That means freeing up a load of spaces that aren't used because you're taking away like the idea of property in it. So it means that wherever you go to, whilst you don't have to do jobs to try and survive because the farms already work, lovelies, it is that we need to, that was being demeaning because most of the jobs don't do anything. They don't contribute to you in any way apart from further oppressing you by contributing to a system whilst you don't get anything out of it. You get the minimal that someone else can pay you to make them have more power over you. And again, nobody forced you to do that. Nobody forced you to think that was a good idea. Nobody forced you to look up at your parents who did that. In the future, people will have more mothers because fewer women will have jobs. Because everything will be voluntary. There's not enough jobs that need to be done, not remotely, that you need 7 billion humans to do it. Humans are machines. Like, as in, whoa, powerful. You don't need 7 billion people to, for instance, keep all the food growing and make sure the power plants stay running. It was a difficult bit where producing power was more difficult than today. That's not what all the people did. Your right to travel is also really, really important to me, which is probably going to sort out that question I had about specification and demarcation. That if we can freely travel, it'll just end up that different areas end up with different vibes, different scenes. And because they are autonomous communities, as soon as they can be recognized and specified, you're allowed to say that you have spaces just for you. For instance, I have no interest in living anywhere near anyone who doesn't say La ilaha illallah. Well, my standards for whom I want to be near are way higher than that. Having met lots of people. Alhamdulillah. It's a counter approach to the secular orthodoxy that we're supposed to speak platitudes to all of each other. No, you can't possibly. There are too many people for you to speak platitudes to all of them too. And so how do different communities get along? In the secular ideal, there's a lot of disingenuousness to it. Disingenuousness, like saying you have a right to practice your religion, you have a right to practice what you believe, and then constantly invading Muslim territories who aren't invading you, so that they can't have self-governance, i.e. an Islamic state as provided for us by Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon us, our prophet. Him. He was whitish with a red tint. So when you project an image of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as an Arab with a big nose and a big backpack and sandals, which in his time, peace and blessings be upon him, was found as like an effeminate thing. Not that he didn't do effeminate things, but it's racism too. It's not just an attack on Muslims, and a clear attack, a clear provocative attack. an act of aggression, an act of offense, and even, yeah, we see through it. You don't project an image of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, onto a French building unless you want some Muslims to kill someone. And you will. Please God, every time you try a similar stunt, we'll try similar stunts. And it's completely separate to the 16 Muslim countries that France is drone striking today. Besides the UN and, like, you know, we've at least got our own perspective. Does anyone want a new perspective on things? I want everyone to be able to make what they want to make. So, like, your right to tools is important to me. Again, we have plenty of tools. I'm going to leave it up here that the difference between now and yesterday and carrying on like now and carrying on like yesterday, that yesterday, within the colonized societies, within anywhere that was calling itself developed, wherever was spending lots of money on colonization, they weren't in any case stable, secure, or rich enough to feed all their people ever, but plenty rich enough to perpetuate themselves. And so every system that has been designed patriarchally, like with everything is for the glory of some dude or a bunch of dudes in a room who are the executives, everything that's designed like that always has to have in its manifest template whatever's said about it that some people don't eat, because the West hasn't been able to provide food for all of its people yet. In the 250 years I've been watching the West, you haven't figured out a way to feed all your people yet. Figured out a way to spend £50 billion of war money on Muslims, deaths. That's all you achieve. In the UK, from the taxpayer's purse. But not how to get the homeless people who live outside my house into the empty hotels or the closed down homeless shelter, which are not 50 meters from me in either direction, in the capital city. So that's an economy of scarcity. Whatever causes the scarcity, an economy of scarcity says we got to divide society into a group who eats and doesn't eat, so at least the great group that eats can stay stable, and there'll be something of this system that is stable. Jeremy Bentham, the guy who invented the panopticon, also gave us this, like, the antithesis of Christianity. He said the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And fuck all the minorities to death. Also, in some ways, the father of the CCTV world, in being the pioneer of prisons as something you could possibly consider humane. Nobody was into it at the time. He spent his life rallying for it, and eventually somebody built one of his designs. Scum of the earth. Like, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, but you should burn all his books. What the fuck can you learn from greatest good for the greatest number of people? If you want to help 99% of the population stay at home, because that's incredible oppression onto the last 1%. You want to make everything good for 99% of the people, you're going to be bending that 1% back over and over again in all the different ways, trying to get it to fit. You can only make it good by making it good for everyone. And the 99%, the masses, the people who you think it's reasonable to watch EastEnders, read the news, and go to a pub and drive a car. You're innocent. So we move into an age of abundance where we've got too much stuff, and now all economic theory becomes operations research. How do we distribute the too much stuff we have to all the people whilst we keep on getting more and more and more stuff per people? Comes in two phases. One of them, the critical right now, will get people who haven't got enough in all the places where they need that. And then stage two, make sure there's a system that wherever you are, if you want a PlayStation, sure, someone will send you a PlayStation. We've got machines that make PlayStations and enough plastic. Of course, we want our system to be better and better at harvesting stuff as we go along, but we really don't want people involved. A robot is like the word for a slave for a good reason. If you work for another man and you're a man, that's degrading. If you work for a man to survive and you're a woman, you've been abused. If you're a child whose mother had to work, you've been robbed. God forgives you from your complicity of these things by expiation in this life. You can consider your expiation the hardship. The hardship is done. That it is sad to acknowledge. This thing called the West was a car crash. People blasphemed. If you want to read like how it happened, God's been very fair, but people decided to reject their truths, like was prophesied. It's all good. The West is sufficiently separate from like any group of people, but no one is the West to say, oh good, that's gone. Joris Bonson doesn't offend me in any way, but the parliamentary system does. He doesn't need to go to work anymore. Parliament is dismissed by these letters patent. I'm not going to use the royal we ever. By these letters patent, I do not consider any of you my subjects. I don't consider any formal law to be upheld nor binding. I don't consider that any group amongst my territories or across the world has a right to join up into organized uniformed groups or ununiformed groups holding weapons or any kind of threat of violence or deprivation over other people in order to assert an arbitrary and unjustified will of law. You can't sign a contract with enough people to make it right for then your group to go hurt other people. My first nationwide imperative is the demilitarization of the state, which includes no weapons onto the people and no weapons onto the other people. No weapons. No weapons held by the state. I really, really, really approve of this thing. I found it on the street next to a 20 bag of cannabis that God gave me. The two of them just there in an alleyway. This, it's, I don't know how to demonstrate to you. It's got a little bit of weight to it. Yeah. If someone held a knife to me, I know that this would be really good for getting the knife out of their hand. I also know that I could hit someone enough that they wouldn't want to hit me back. I could, I could hit them in the head, and I would have to really, really try to leave lasting damage. But without being able to give a hard swing at all, I would be able to give you a dead arm and a dead leg. Whatever this hit you, if you were trying to, it wouldn't be good. It would also be good to have a kind of standard of, in America, there's a standard of how deadly a weapon you're allowed to carry around. And of course, this would look very silly over there. But here, our main problem is knives. And this is a good anti-knife weapon that gets knives out of people's hands and could maybe set the standard as something that's distinctly like a magic wand. Self-defense is important. The reason I'm given the right to do this by God is not because of all my clever ideas, but because if I wanted to defend myself in the street, which I'm totally capable of doing, the police state will come down on me. And so I live under like outright abject tyranny. The reason I got divine right, I never heard that before. Personal defense. I mean, in this day and age, personal defense can mean mecha suits. It's not the police that are stopping the people from going apeshit with spontaneous violence. And we are the best militarily equipped populace today than there's ever been. We're swole as a civility in how much tools we have for removing governments and corporations if we wanted to, or no, not so much people from other places because they're similarly equipped. Ish, or just God's on their side and they're undefeated. God loves not the aggressors, it says in the Quran. Oh, okay. So that's not a replacement for law. That's a truncheon. The word fasces is the thing that the Roman civic guards would go and hit the civilians with. Had this class of, they're nowhere near the decision-making class, but from the underclass, some of them get shiny uniforms and special privileges and rights that they're allowed to use only on the people from the rest of that class, but of course never